In the early hours of September 1st, 1939, the tranquility of the Polish dawn was brutally shattered by the roar of Luftwaffe engines. In a blitz of steel and fire, the German attack on Poland commenced, signaling the grim opening of the Second World War. An aerial bombardment was launched on the unsuspecting city of Wielun, a strategic location near the German-Polish border. Wielun, while not a significant military target, was selected for the initial offensive due to its proximity to the border and the impact its destruction would have on Polish morale. Just past 4:40 a.m., German aircraft unleashed a torrent of destruction upon the city. The devastation was cataclysmic. Hospitals, buildings, and houses were decimated, reducing much of the city to a smoldering ruin. Civilian casualties were horrendous, numbering in the thousands, while the city itself lost approximately 70% of its buildings to the onslaught. The attack on Wielun was not just a military operation. It was a terror tactic designed to inflict maximum psychological impact on the Polish populace. Simultaneously, the Polish capital, Warsaw, fell under a ferocious assault. The city's anti-aircraft defenses were woefully inadequate against the onslaught, and within hours, parts of the city were in flames. However, despite the carnage and destruction, the people of Warsaw remained defiant, their resilience setting a tone that would endure throughout the war. While the attacks on Wielun and Warsaw signaled the commencement of hostilities, they were also part of a broader strategic plan. By overwhelming Poland's defenses from the outset and causing widespread destruction, Germany intended to shock the Polish military and government, thereby making the subsequent ground invasion easier. This strategy was a hallmark of what would become known as Blitzkrieg, or lightning war, which called for fast, concentrated assaults designed to quickly subdue the enemy. The bombings were also indicative of the changing nature of warfare. The use of air power to bomb civilian targets on such a scale was a relatively new development and signaled the increasingly total nature of war in the 20th century. Civilian populations were no longer mere bystanders in war, but had become a part of the front line. However, these opening salvos of the war were just the beginning. German ground forces had also begun their advance into Poland, marking the start of a campaign that would last for over a month and result in the death and displacement of millions. The aerial bombardment of Wielun and Warsaw on September 1st, 1939, was a harrowing precursor to the widespread devastation that the Second World War would bring. It signaled a new phase in warfare, where civilian populations were no longer exempt from direct attack, and cities could be destroyed from the air in a matter of hours. Moreover, it marked the debut of Blitzkrieg, a strategy that would play a significant role in the early years of the war and have lasting implications for military strategy in the decades that followed. In the wake of the initial assaults on Wielun and Warsaw, the German Wehrmacht commenced a systematic campaign to overrun the entirety of Poland. From September 3rd to September 19th, 1939, a dramatic sequence of events unfolded that saw the German forces employing a rapid and concentrated offensive tactic, known as Blitzkrieg, to encircle and decimate isolated Polish units. The key battles during this period, such as the Battle of Bzura and the Battle of Tuchola Forest, are reflective of this larger strategy. The Battle of the Bzura, fought from September 9th to September 22nd, constituted the largest battle during the invasion of Poland and represented Poland's major counteroffensive effort. The Bzura River, located west of Warsaw, became the arena of a fierce clash between Polish forces and the German invaders. It is significant to note that, at the outset, the Polish Poznan and Pomorze armies succeeded in disorganizing the German Eighth Army, inflicting substantial losses. This counterattack, initially promising for the Poles, stalled due to several factors. The German forces, despite the unexpected setback, were able to regroup quickly, aided by their superior logistical support and communication lines. Additionally, the relentless onslaught of the Luftwaffe, the German Air Force, on the Polish ground forces turned the tide in favor of Germany. As a result, the Polish counteroffensive was quashed, and the forces retreated towards Warsaw in a disorganized manner. Simultaneously, the Battle of Tuchola Forest, which occurred from September 1st to September 5th, encapsulated the sheer might of the Blitzkrieg strategy. Here, the German forces aimed to capture the Polish corridor, a strip of land providing Poland with access to the Baltic Sea, a strategic region in terms of commerce and military operations. The corridor, largely consisting of the Tuchola Forest, a densely wooded area, was defended by the Polish Pomeranian Army. The engagement in the Tuchola Forest is representative of the broader Blitzkrieg strategy that Germany implemented in its invasion of Poland. The German forces, consisting of the Fourth Army, attacked swiftly, aiming to encircle and isolate Polish units before eliminating them. In this particular battle, the Pomeranian Army faced the combined might of mechanized units and air power, overwhelming their defensive efforts. By September 5th, the Germans had taken control of the forest, inflicting significant losses on the Polish side. The success of the Blitzkrieg strategy in these battles was a testament to the German military's planning and preparation. The speed and intensity of their attacks often left Polish forces unable to effectively respond or coordinate a counteroffensive. Additionally, German control of the skies and efficient use of armored units created a combined arms approach that proved devastating to the Poles. The Siege of Warsaw, a bitter two-week confrontation in September 1939, was an event of stark contrast. A city admired for its spirit was brought to its knees, yet not without exhibiting a resistance that etched its place in history. September 9, 1939, marked the commencement of the siege. The German Wehrmacht had swiftly swept through Poland's countryside, applying its Blitzkrieg, or lightning war, doctrine with chilling effectiveness. Warsaw, the capital city, was largely left untouched until then. With the majority of Poland already under its belt, the Wehrmacht turned its gaze towards the defiant city. As the first shots echoed across the Vistula River, the city of Warsaw braced itself for the imminent onslaught. Commanding the defense was General Wielun Bzura. A man of considerable experience, Bzura knew his forces were vastly outnumbered and outgunned. Yet Warsaw was more than just a city. It was a symbol of Polish resistance and pride, and surrender was not an option without a fight. He swiftly put together a hodgepodge defense consisting of a few regular units, civilian volunteers, scouts, and even academics from the Warsaw University of Technology. In stark contrast, leading the German attack was General Johannes Blaskowitz, a seasoned military strategist, commanding the German Eighth Army. The German forces enjoyed superiority in numbers, equipment, and, perhaps most critically, air power. The Luftwaffe, with its contingent of bomber aircraft, played a significant role in the siege. From the onset, German bombers relentlessly bombarded Warsaw, intending to break the will of the defenders and civilians alike. The Polish defenders, though outmatched, were not deterred. On the ground, barricades were erected and positions fortified. Artillery pieces were discreetly placed within the city's numerous parks and behind vital structures, hoping to provide a sturdy line of defense against the German advance. Meanwhile, in the sky, the Polish anti-aircraft batteries worked overtime, attempting to repel the waves of German bombers that clouded the skies day and night. Despite such gallant efforts, the German siege tightened. Polish defense positions were gradually overrun, with the Luftwaffe's incessant bombardment causing tremendous damage. Supply lines were choked off, food and ammunition became scarce, and civilian casualties started to mount alarmingly. The situation reached its climax on September 25th, when Blaskowitz ordered a full-scale assault intending to capture the city. However, the Polish defenders held their ground, repelling the attack and inflicting heavy casualties on the Germans. Despite this victory, the reality of the situation was starkly clear. Without a miracle, Warsaw could not hold out much longer. After 20 days of relentless assault, Warsaw was on the brink of collapse. Civilians were starving, and the once beautiful city was now a landscape of ruins. On September 27th, realizing the futility of further resistance, General Bzura made the painful decision to capitulate. On September 28th, after nearly 3 weeks of grueling siege, Warsaw officially surrendered. The Polish capital's fall marked the end of a significant chapter in the Polish campaign, but not the end of the Polish resistance, which continued fiercely throughout World War II. The Siege of Warsaw, thus, serves as a poignant reminder of the human spirit's resilience and the devastating consequences of war. Even in the face of overwhelming odds, the city's defenders chose to fight, underscoring the adage that victory isn't always about winning the war. Sometimes it's about the courage to stand your ground, no matter the odds. The defenders of Warsaw did just that, leaving behind a legacy of resistance that continues to inspire to this day. September 17, 1939, stands as a day of infamy in Polish history. The invasion of Poland by the Soviet Union from the east, pursuant to the clandestine Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact, was a pivotal moment that further exacerbated the already dismal situation of the embattled nation. A mere fortnight after Nazi Germany had triggered World War II by invading Poland from the west, the Soviet Red Army crossed the eastern frontier of the country. This eastern onslaught, unbeknownst to the Poles, was a consequence of a secret protocol within the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact. Formerly known as the Treaty of Non-Aggression between Germany and the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics, it had been signed on August 23, 1939, between the Soviet Union's Foreign Minister Vyacheslav Molotov and his German counterpart Joachim von Ribbentrop. Hidden within the pact's text was a secret protocol that partitioned Eastern Europe into spheres of influence. Poland, tragically, fell into both German and Soviet spheres. This arrangement set the stage for the dual invasion, which would seal Poland's fate in the early days of World War II. As dawn broke on September 17th, Marshal Kliment Voroshilov, commanding the Red Army, ordered the invasion. The Red Army, numbering over 600,000, rapidly surged across the eastern borders. Polish military, already stretched thin due to the ongoing resistance against the German invasion, found themselves utterly unprepared to face a second front. Soviet propaganda attempted to justify this invasion, claiming it was to protect the Ukrainian and Belarusian brothers on Polish territory from the German threat. However, their objective was hardly benevolent. As they marched into Polish territory, the Soviets implemented a systematic campaign of repression, rounding up Polish military personnel, intelligentsia, and anyone perceived as a threat to the Soviet system. The infamous Katyn massacre, where thousands of Polish military officers were executed, is the most harrowing testament to this campaign. Meanwhile, the international reaction was largely one of shock and disappointment. The British and French governments, having signed mutual defense pacts with Poland, found themselves in a quandary. With their armies already engaged with the German forces in the West and the looming threat of a direct confrontation with the Soviet Union, they had little choice but to protest verbally while avoiding military retaliation. On the Polish front, the Soviet invasion marked the end of any lingering hopes for the Poles to repel the German invasion. The beleaguered Polish forces, now squeezed between the German hammer and the Soviet anvil, were unable to mount any effective resistance against the Soviet advance. By early October, both German and Soviet forces had overrun the entire country, effectively partitioning Poland between them. In hindsight, the Soviet invasion of Poland on September 17, 1939, was a grimly defining moment in the history of World War II. It marked the cynical culmination of the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact and set the tone for the brutal occupation and repression that would haunt Poland in the coming years. Despite the despair, the indomitable Polish spirit of resistance remained undimmed, sparking the flames of struggle that would burn throughout the war, exemplifying their national motto, "For our freedom and yours." September 28, 1939, marked the culmination of a horrific month for Poland. The day saw the formalization of the capitulation of Warsaw, the vibrant capital and the heart of Polish resistance. This capitulation represented not only the end of the active invasion phase, but also the beginning of a somber period that saw the division of Poland between two of the era's most powerful totalitarian regimes, Nazi Germany and the Soviet Union. In the early morning of September 28th, General Tadeusz Kutzeba, the deputy commander of the Warsaw Army, met with General Johannes Blaskowitz, the commander of the German Eighth Army, in the outskirts of the city. A mood of despair hung over the meeting as Kutzeba, weighed down by the reality of his city's impossible position, offered the capitulation of Warsaw. Poland's capitulation was the result of a merciless onslaught from the Germans. Since the beginning of the Siege of Warsaw on September 9th, the city had been subjected to relentless air and artillery bombardment. Despite the valiant resistance of Polish forces, the city's defenses were gradually worn down. The loss of critical infrastructure, severe shortage of supplies, and the relentless German assault forced the Polish leadership to contemplate surrender. The Germans, having suffered heavy casualties and keen to avoid an urban battle that would further slow their advance, accepted the capitulation. But this acceptance came with a grim rider. The Germans insisted on a complete and unconditional surrender, effectively signaling the end of Polish self-rule. As the ink dried on the capitulation agreement, Poland's worst fears started to become reality. A tragic page was turned in the nation's history, marking the start of its division and the initiation of a brutal occupation period. On the same day, Germany and the Soviet Union, acting upon the secret protocol of the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact, began the formal process of partitioning Poland. The Germans took control of the western and central parts of the country, incorporating them into the Third Reich, or setting up puppet regimes like the general government. Meanwhile, the Soviet Union seized the eastern regions. The territories they occupied were promptly incorporated into the Soviet republics of Ukraine and Belarus. The Soviets initiated a brutal regime of oppression and mass deportations, targeting the Polish intelligentsia, political class, and any potential elements of resistance. The fall of Warsaw and the subsequent partition of Poland marked a dark chapter in World War II. It was a glaring testament to the ruthlessness of totalitarian regimes and the international community's failure to prevent a tragic conflict. October 6, 1939, is a day etched in the annals of history. It represents an episode of determination and tragedy. The last Polish army unit, clinging to the vestiges of their homeland's independence, surrendered. With this act, the active military resistance against the dual invaders, Nazi Germany and the Soviet Union, ended. Concurrently, the Polish government and a segment of military personnel initiated a daring evacuation to Romania, vowing to carry on the struggle from abroad. The territories that remained, bereft of their leaders and protectors, succumbed to the grim reality of Nazi and Soviet control. The last Polish army unit to surrender was the independent operational group Polesi, commanded by General Franciszek Kleeberg. Kleeberg and his men had been engaged in the Battle of Koch, a desperate attempt to halt the German advance and buy more time for the evacuation of the Polish government and key military personnel. His force, though outgunned and outnumbered, showed a resolute spirit that typified the Polish defense throughout the campaign. However, the relentless pressure from the German forces eventually led to their surrender on October 6th. The decision to surrender was not taken lightly. It was a heartbreaking resolution, taken under extreme circumstances with a heavy heart, a last resort born out of necessity rather than a lack of will to fight. The soldiers under Kleeberg's command had fought valiantly, determined to defend their homeland against all odds. Their bravery and sacrifice are remembered and honored as a symbol of Poland's indomitable spirit during one of its darkest periods. Simultaneously, as the final remnants of the Polish army were surrendering, a different kind of struggle was underway. The Polish government, along with a portion of military personnel, had embarked on an audacious escape. Under the cover of chaos and destruction, they managed to evade capture and made their way towards the Romanian border. This hazardous journey, fraught with danger, was undertaken with a single goal in mind: to continue the struggle from abroad, representing Poland's interests and orchestrating resistance against the occupiers. However, the territories left behind fell into a new, oppressive regime. The lands of Poland were divided as spoils between the Nazi and Soviet forces, who promptly established their brutal rule. The culture, tradition, and identity of Poland were systematically suppressed, and its people subjected to indescribable atrocities. The nation was pillaged, its resources exploited, and its populace used as expendable labor. The Polish people found themselves living in a cruel dystopia, a stark contrast to the proud and vibrant nation they once knew. But hope is a hard thing to extinguish. Despite these dire circumstances, the spirit of Poland lived on. The actions of the last Polish army unit, the courageous evacuation of its leaders, and the resilience of its people at home and abroad were testaments to a nation's spirit that refused to be crushed. Poland may have been occupied physically, but the fight for its soul had just begun. The struggle for freedom, initiated in the desperate days of September 1939, would continue for the next 6 years, embodying the spirit of an undying Poland.